Have you ever come home from work and sat down on your phone to have just 10 minutes by yourself, away from distractions and stress, to rest? Only to find that all of a sudden, 3 hours have passed, you're still alone in your room, which is a mess by the way, you've lost all feeling in your leg, you still haven't made dinner, and you've somehow ended up on the arranged marriages side of the internet, which apparently is a side that it has? Hi. I'm Daniel, and it is my honour and privilege to report that psychologists are actively comparing the behaviour of humans on their phones to rats trapped in cages. So that's nice. Look, I'm not going to shame anyone for using social media or looking at memes or wasting their time on the internet, because Lord knows we all have moments of weakness. But there are few behaviours quite as emblematic of the 21st century as staring at your phone like a dopamine-deprived zombie, hoping desperately for something to numb the existential terror of ecological collapse and political dysfunction. So, if we're going to have a discussion about how psychology is relevant to our day-to-day lives, there are few better places to start than here. What can psychology tell us about learning and addiction, and how can we use that knowledge to help understand why we, as a species, are so addicted to our glowing rectangles? Hello and welcome to Psychology I.R.L, the show where we go outside the classroom to see how the theories of old, dead white guys with a lack of animal empathy can help us understand the chaos of life in the 21st century. Today's episode, Operant conditioning and how it's turning us into rats in cages. The psychology of learning largely concerns itself with how the behaviour of organisms changes due to their experiences. This is, of course, a slightly different definition than the typical colloquial definition of learning, which involves being locked in a classroom for 6 hours and pretending to take notes on algebra. Under this definition, learning isn't only something small children are capable of. It's something almost all organisms do. Humans learn, of course, at least in theory, but so do dogs, monkeys, sea cucumbers, and even 19-year-old boys, though further research is required to support that last one. Due to this, psychologists looking to understand the mechanisms through which humans learn new behaviours often start by conducting their experiments on animals. The idea, of course, is that many of these same principles by which animals learn new behaviours work the same way in humans, though the reality is that pesky ethics committees tend to shut down experiments that involve giving humans crippling radiation poisoning. Due to these vile ethics committees, psychologists have traditionally used rats and pigeons to demonstrate how animals learn to perform particular behaviours. In particular, through something called operant conditioning, animals like rats can be trained to perform all sorts of behaviours, from pressing a lever right through to competing in intense games of college rat basketball. I'd highly recommend looking up clips of the latter next time you're wasting your life away on your phone to escape the curse of sentience, because it's an extremely underappreciated sport. Though keep in mind that they still get paid better than female basketballers, so don't feel too bad for them. The story of operant conditioning, as it's usually told, begins in the early 20th century, when a psychologist named E.L. Thorndike conducted a series of experiments involving cats in boxes. And can you blame him? There was no short-form internet brain rot back then. They had to make their own fun. The boxes were set up so that there was food outside the box, but it was impossible to escape and get to the food unless the cats stepped on a button inside the box that opened the latch. What Thorndike found was that the cats did not immediately press the button, because contrary to popular opinion, they are not omniscient deities. Instead, they kinda just wandered around and did cat things until they happened to step on the button and escape, where they got the food. Then, Thorndike, like the psychopath he was, put the cats back in the box, only to find that they escaped quicker this time. And when he put them in yet again, they escaped even quicker. The cats, in other words, were learning. They had retained in their little cat brains some understanding of how the box worked, and were using that information to escape and get to the food. From this, Thorndike formulated what's called the law of effect, which states that when an organism performs a behaviour that leads to a desirable outcome, like pressing the button to escape the cage and get food, that behaviour is strengthened, so they're more likely to repeat it in the future. And on the flip side, if a behaviour leads to an unpleasant outcome, that organism is less likely to repeat it. This seems fairly obvious, but there was a problem with Thorndike's studies. A number of problems, actually, including the entire endeavour of cats and boxes, but the problem was that the cats could only perform the target behaviour, pressing the button, once, because then they escaped and Thorndike had to go chase after them, and it was all kind of inconvenient. So in comes possibly the biggest name in this field, B.F. Skinner. In 1938, Skinner published The Behaviour of Organisms, which, aside from being a banger of a title for an avant-garde romance film, outlined his take on the whole "why do things do things" dilemma. Skinner is widely known today for his experiments with rats, an iconic upgrade from the far more cumbersome cats, which he kept in cages now called Skinner boxes, in which the rats could press a lever to receive food. This allowed for something called free responding. Because the rats could press the lever over and over without escaping, Skinner could study their behaviour in far more detail than Thorndike ever could. Not to mention, the rats' behaviour was voluntary, in that if they weren't hungry, they didn't have to press the lever. Skinner had invented the perfect environment to study Thorndike's law of effect. And sure enough, as the law of effect would predict, if pressing the lever leads to food, the rats will eventually learn to press the lever more often. This is taught through a process called shaping, in which the rat is given food as a reward for individual behaviours, like rearing or facing the lever, that are eventually combined until it is able to press the lever by itself. This is one of those concepts in psychology that seems so painfully obvious that it feels like a waste of time to study. Like, yeah, obviously, if you give an animal food for doing something, it'll do that thing more. We know this principle not because of science, but because it's just common sense. We see it all the time, not just in animals, but in humans too. It's so obvious, it feels like a waste of time even naming it, not to mention elitist. So anyway, operant conditioning refers to learning through consequences. To be more specific though, operant conditioning involves learning through schedules of reinforcement and punishment, which influence the likelihood of performing a future behaviour. See, that's the other problem with Thorndike's theory. Defining outcomes in terms of pleasant and unpleasant, or good and bad, introduces a lot of subjectivity into the equation. And this was in the middle of what's called the behaviourist movement, which emphasised the importance of objective, observable behaviours to combat Freud's psychoanalysis. So subjectivity was a no-go. What might be a good outcome for one rat, or human for that matter, might be a bad outcome for another. Receiving food might be a good outcome for a cat, but I'm on a diet and I prefer dog food anyway. You might like listening to clips of Jordan Peterson, whereas it makes me want to delete my ears. Good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant are subjective. So, to address this issue, the terminology changed. Instead of pleasant and unpleasant outcomes, Skinner was concerned with reinforcers and punishers. Reinforcers are outcomes of a behaviour that increase the likelihood of performing that behaviour again. Punishers decrease the likelihood of performing a behaviour. Reinforcers are not necessarily pleasant, and punishers don't have to be unpleasant. All that matters is how they impact the likelihood of performing a behaviour. A good example of the difference here is a child who misbehaves in class while they're supposed to be doing the other kind of learning. If the teacher yells at the child and that makes the child stop misbehaving and start doing their work, then yelling is a punisher because it reduces the target behaviour of messing around in class. But if the misbehaving child is acting out because they want attention, and so getting yelled at actually makes them act out more, then yelling at them is a reinforcer because it strengthens their behaviour. The same consequence can be a reinforcer for one organism and a punisher for another, depending on how it impacts the target behaviour. Similarly, when we're talking about operant conditioning, the terms positive and negative are used, but they don't mean good and bad. Positive consequences involve the addition of a stimulus, whilst negative consequences involve the removal of one. Giving someone $100 is a positive outcome, but so is giving someone a brick to the face. Likewise, losing $100 is a negative outcome, but so is miraculously being cured of leukemia. What matters is whether something is being added or taken away. So that means we have 4 possible outcomes for any given behaviour: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement involves adding a stimulus to reinforce or strengthen a behaviour. So for example, when you go to work, assuming you don't work in a Congolese cobalt mine, you get paid. And unless you're a communist and/or a monk and/or a communist monk, money is probably a positive reinforcer. When you get money for performing a behavior, you are more likely to repeat that behavior, hence going to work again the next day. Going to work is the target behavior, and getting paid is a positive reinforcer that strengthens that behavior. The food that Thorndike's cat and Skinner's rats received is also a form of positive reinforcement. And food can be a positive reinforcer for humans too, like a child who eats their broccoli because they want dessert. Dessert is a positive reinforcer that strengthens the behavior of broccoli eating. Negative reinforcement usually involves taking something bad away to strengthen your behavior. Painkillers, for instance, take your pain away, so the next time you're in pain, you're likely to take them again. Other substances can also take away the pain, though. Make of that what you will. Positive punishment means adding an aversive stimulus to weaken a behavior. So if you make fun of me for having red hair and I punch you in the stomach, I am adding pain to reduce the likelihood of you insulting me in the future. Yelling at or spanking a child, or an adult I suppose, is also an example of positive punishment. There are quite a number of jokes I could make here, but I won't make any of them because I'm better than that. Finally, negative punishment means removing something to weaken a behavior. Taking a child's favourite toy away for misbehaving is an example, but so is receiving a speeding fine, which removes your money to reduce the likelihood of you speeding in the future. But let's be honest, speeding fines aren't particularly effective. People still speed, after all. Getting a fine might make you a bit more careful, but it certainly won't eliminate the problem. One reason for this is that speeding fines are an inconsistent punishment. You don't get fined every time you go over the speed limit, just when you do it around a speed camera. And sure enough, Skinner was able to study exactly this sort of issue with his rats, who also frequently sped in school zones. In operant conditioning, the rate at which the reinforcer or punisher is delivered is called the schedule of reinforcement. Schedules can be continuous, meaning every behavior is reinforced, or partial, meaning only some behaviors are reinforced. So if Skinner were to set up his box so that the rat got food every time it pressed the lever, that would be a continuous schedule. Every time the behavior is performed, it is reinforced. But not every behavior we perform in the real world is reinforced instantly, so he investigated a few different partial schedules of reinforcement. Partial schedules can be ratio schedules, meaning the behavior is reinforced after a certain number of repetitions, or interval schedules, meaning the behavior is reinforced after a given amount of time has passed. These schedules can then be fixed, meaning the gap between reinforcers is constant, or variable, meaning the gap is unpredictable. Once again, this leaves us with 4 possible combinations. Fixed ratio schedules involve receiving a reward after performing a behavior a given number of times, like if the rat gets food after every 5 lever presses. In the real world, we can see these sorts of schedules in loyalty programs, like those buy 10 coffees, get the 11th free type schemes. The target behavior here is buying coffee, and the reinforcer is a free coffee. But you only receive that reward once you've performed the behavior a set number of times. Fixed ratio schedules are typically characterized by a high rate of responding, followed by a break once the reinforcer has been received. So for instance, the rat will keep pressing the lever until it gets food, but then it will stop to take a rest. Once it's hungry though, it'll go right back to pressing the lever. Variable ratio schedules mean the reinforcer is received after the behavior has been performed an unpredictable number of times. So the rat doesn't know how many times it has to press the lever to get food. It might take 3 presses one time, then 7 the next, then back down to just 1. It's constantly in flux. In the real world, this type of schedule has massive ramifications for gambling. Most types of gambling ultimately follow this schedule, where you have to perform the target behavior, which usually involves being separated from your money, an uncertain number of times before you get the reward. With slot machines, for instance, you don't know how many times you have to play until you make it big. It varies. So you have no choice but to keep playing until you win, no matter how long that takes. And sure enough, variable ratio schedules are characterized by high rates of responding with few pauses or breaks. That's why gambling is structured this way. If you knew how many hands of blackjack you had to play until you won, you would just play that many and then stop. but you don't know how many rounds it takes, so you have to keep going until you win, collapse from exhaustion, or achieve sage-like transcendence, whichever happens first. Literal gambling is the obvious real-world application of this idea, but the same principle is used to sell lottery tickets and gambling for children, like Pokemon cards and video game loot boxes. A fixed interval schedule means that the behavior is reinforced if it's performed within a set, consistent time frame. So for instance, you could train the rat so that it learns that it only gets food if it presses the lever once every 10 minutes. If you're contracted to work certain hours at your job, going to work is a fixed interval schedule. You get paid at the same time every week if you perform the target behavior, which in this case is your job, at the time you are obligated to do it. That time doesn't change. You have to do it at the same time every week if you want the reward. You could go to work in the middle of the night if you wanted to, but you wouldn't get paid. And besides, everyone would be like, "What are you doing in the school at 12:21 a.m?" And you'd have to be like, "Well, I'm investigating the secret shadow demon cult that lives behind the sports shed," and it would mess up the timesheet, so it's not worth the trouble. Similarly, watching your favorite TV show at 6 every day because you lost too much money at blackjack and can't afford Netflix is also an example, because performing the target behavior, i.e. turning the TV on and looking at it, is only reinforced if you do it at a particular fixed time. Fixed interval schedules, then, have fairly long pauses in behavior following reinforcement, but responding increases as the time for the behavior arrives. So in our TV example, you probably won't turn the TV on to see if Peppa Pig is on at 4 in the morning if you know it won't be on until 7. But around, say, 6:30, you might find yourself checking the TV, and when 7 comes around, you will be glued to the next installment in the saga of Peppa fat-shaming her innocent, hard-working father. So go you. Anyway, that leaves us with variable interval schedules. These schedules involve the behavior only being reinforced after an unpredictable amount of time has passed. So the rat only gets fed if it presses the lever after 5 minutes, then 12 minutes, then 17 minutes, then 37.5 seconds. Like with variable ratios, variable intervals are unpredictable. Think about fishing. I can cast my line out, but then I have to wait to actually catch something. I don't know how long that will take. I can reel my line in and cast it out over and over if I want, but at the end of the day, all I can do is wait until the fish arrives. And you could argue that variable interval schedules apply to other types of fishing too, like if I went around with my shirt off, fishing for compliments. I don't know how long it'll take, so I just have to keep trying. Though with my physique and complexion, I would probably end up with skin cancer before much else. As such, variable interval schedules tend to have a steady rate of responding with few pauses. If I'm determined to catch a fish, be that a literal or metaphorical one, then all I can really do is wait until I catch it. For another example, think about how the stock market works. I put money into the stock market, a behavior, and given enough time, I will, in theory, earn that money back when the market swings my way. But I don't know how long that will take. I can put more money in or take more money out, but I'm not going to get any reward until the invisible hand of the market decides to point my way. So, we've got 4 possible outcomes of a behavior: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment that can be delivered through 4 different schedules: fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. Considering I've mentioned alcohol, gambling, video games, TV, and public humiliation, chances are you're connecting the dots between operant conditioning and addiction. And sure enough, we can use the framework operant conditioning provides to help explain how and why addiction occurs. You engage in a particular behavior, that behavior is reinforced in some way, which strengthens it, leading to you performing that behavior more often in the future. Consider the matching law. This states that the proportion of behaviors directed to a particular operant schedule matches the proportion of reinforcers received from that schedule. In other, slightly less pretentious words, albeit still in a pretentious tone, you will perform behaviors that reward you consistently more than behaviors that reward you inconsistently. So if you win more hands at blackjack than at the slot machines, that's where you'll spend your time and money. However, not all rewards are equal. Some rewards are obviously bigger reinforcers than others, like $1 million being better than $1,000, which is itself better than being stabbed in the eye with a sharpened candy cane. But when we receive the reward also has an impact on how much we value it. As a general rule, we value immediate rewards more highly than delayed rewards. The further away a reward is, the less valuable it is to us in the present. If I gave the option of $100 now or $100 in a year's time, you'd probably choose to take the money now, which is the correct option because at current rates of inflation in 1 year's time, you would actually owe me money. This is called the Ainsley-Rachlin rule, which states that the choice between two rewards is ultimately determined by the value of those rewards at that particular time. So if a pigeon is forced to choose between a small but immediate reward or a large but delayed reward, it'll choose the smaller reward. But if both rewards are in the future, as in the pigeon has to wait either way, it just has to wait slightly more for the larger reward, then it's more likely to choose that one. This could go some way towards explaining why it's easy to say you'll study rather than watch a YouTube video about Mario Kart speedruns the day before you have to make that choice, but a lot harder to exercise self-control in the moment. The day before, both rewards, be that learning niche video game trivia or getting good grades, are in the future, so the values of both are reduced and it's easier to choose the less immediately rewarding but ultimately better decision. In the moment, however, short-term gratification usually wins out. There we go. Operant conditioning in a nutshell, whatever that means. We've learned what operant conditioning is, the types of reinforcers and punishers out there, the different schedules of reinforcement, the matching law, and the value of immediate versus delayed rewards. We've also looked at two of the most prominent theorists in this field, Thorndike with his cats and Skinner with his rats. Now, let's take all of this information and put it together. Let's use what we've learned about operant conditioning to explain why we spend so much time on our phones. Normally, I'd start this part with some statistic about how much time we spend each day on our phones, or the prevalence of social media addiction, but let's not kid ourselves. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We, as individuals and as a society, spend way too much time on our phones these days. And to be fair, that's not inherently a problem. Today's teenagers have heard anti-phone speeches ad nauseum, and clearly they've fallen on deaf ears, because the truth of the matter is that technology is not inherently bad. At the end of the day, it's your life. Do with it what you want. If you're happy spending 24/7 on your phone, then by all means, do that. That being said, I personally can't help but feel that there's something about social media and short-form content like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts that feels distinctly unproductive. And again, you don't need to be endlessly productive in your life if you don't want to. It's your life. If you want to spend it picking the lint out of your belly button, be my guest. But there's something about social media that feels different. It feels manipulative somehow. Deceptive. Like, sure, social media can be fun, but there are so many other fun things we could be doing in our spare time that we just don't, because there's this gravitational pull to swiping through Instagram. I could spend my free time learning a new skill, or reading a book, or examining a movie, or analysing the lyrics of a song I like, and really getting a new perspective on life. But instead I'm here, glued to my phone, watching memes in Arabic. I don't even speak Arabic. I don't know what the joke is. It's not funny, it's not informative, it's not creative. I mean, it might be. I wouldn't know. But I'm still here. I could spend this time digesting art. Instead, I'm here consuming content. This isn't accidental, of course. The largest tech companies haven't all coincidentally happened to design their platforms to maximize user engagement at the cost of our attention spans and ability to relate to the world around us. This isn't an accidental byproduct of technological advancement. This is the end goal, and for fairly obvious reasons. Social media companies make their money through targeted advertising and by collecting and selling your personal data. The more time you spend on social media, the more ads you can see and the more data they can collect. There is a very clear financial incentive to keep people scrolling. So, if We're the Rats and Mark Zuckerberg is B.F. Skinner, let's use the framework of operant conditioning to understand how social media is designed to maximize engagement. The core of my argument today is this. Social media is designed to create an environment in which there is an endless stream of content, which acts as a constant stream of reinforcement that requires minimal user engagement to maintain. There are 3 steps to this process. 1, how these platforms get you into the app. 2, how they ensure a constant stream of user-made content. And 3, how they keep you sitting there, scrolling your life away. So, let's start with the first step. How are social media platforms designed to get you to use the platform in the first place? After all, if the goal of these companies is to maximize engagement so that they can maximize revenue, they need you to use the platform at all. If you have the app on your phone but never open it, like Fish Friender or any other number of apps I've downloaded, looked at, and never touched again, these companies won't make $1 off of you. There's nothing stopping you from downloading Instagram, having a look around, deciding it's more fun to bash your head against the wall, and never touching the app again. So let's pretend we're web developers. How do we get people to consistently engage with the app? I know this is going to sound conspiracy theoristy, so bear with me. Phone notifications are a tool used by these platforms to get us to pay attention to them. They do this by acting as what's called a discriminative stimulus. In operant conditioning, a discriminative stimulus is something in the environment that tells us a particular behavior will be reinforced if we perform it now. So for instance, if you trained a rat to only press the lever when a light is on, that light would be a discriminative stimulus. Likewise, if you stop playing Snake and start pretending to do your work when your boss walks past your desk, your boss is a discriminative stimulus. Their presence tells you that now is the time to perform a given behavior if you want to be rewarded for it. Every time you hear your phone ding and see that little red dot on the app, what do you want to do? Check your phone, most likely. Either that or throw yourself in a lake, but we're assuming you have positive interactions on social media. The notification is a discriminative stimulus in that it's telling you that now's the time to perform the behavior, opening the app, if you want to receive a reinforcer, which in this case is a message from a friend or a meme that somebody sent you or a reaction to your story. The app doesn't have to tell you this information. Sure, it's convenient to know when someone's messaged you, but I don't really need a notification from Facebook because it thinks I'd make a really great member of Seedless Watermelons Against Catholics at 10:19 a.m. on Tuesday morning. But they send it anyway because even if I know the notification probably isn't important, I have to check it anyway in case it is, which means I'm now using the app. And if I am, in fact, interested in Seedless Watermelons Against Catholics, well, now they've got my attention, which means we can move on to the next stage. Before that though, I'd like to point out that receiving a message is itself operant conditioning using a variable interval schedule. The messages you receive from your friends are reinforcers that reward you for opening the app, but it's often unpredictable when they'll arrive. So if you're waiting for a particular message, you've got no choice but to keep impulsively checking the app, just like a rat who keeps pressing the lever over and over in the hopes that this time will be the time it gets food. If you've ever been desperately waiting for a message from a crush, or a potential employer, or a sworn arch enemy, you can probably relate to this. So, I've opened Facebook to get rid of that pesky little red circle on the app, and I may or may not be looking at Seedless Watermelons Against Catholics. What's next? Well, a fundamental requirement of the model used by these platforms is user-made content. Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube don't make content, they just host it. Same with Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I hate being self-aware. Anyway, these platforms rely on people using their platform to consume that content, so they need a constant, never-ending stream of stuff, Or people will close the app and go back to watching TV and reading books and having fulfilling interpersonal relationships. And we can't have that. So how do we guarantee that some users keep making content for the other users to consume? Well, why does anyone ever post anything on social media? Because they want other people to see it. And why do they want other people to see it? Because most likely they want other people to respond to it, to approve of it. People post selfies on Instagram because they want people to think they look good. They upload Let's Plays to YouTube and do trends on TikTok because they want the world, or even just their friends, to see what they've made, what they've done, and approve of it. Or at least that's part of it. It's no doubt more complex than that, and other motives are certainly at play, but hey, this is psychology. It's not like we're trying to figure out human nature or anything like that. So anyway, humans naturally seek social approval, and social media is the perfect hunting ground for this. Whereas before, I had to go around shirtless in public and wait until someone complimented me, now I can put it on social media and see exactly how many people like it or dislike it. People tend to be quite personal about their true opinions in public, but on the internet, it's free game. And the UV index is much lower, which makes it much more sustainable for my kind. Thanks to social media, we can all actively quantify our social approval at all times. In this wondrous technocratic dystopia of ours, we can see exactly how many people have watched our Let's Plays, how many likes our covers of Wonderwall have gotten, and how many fire emojis have been sent in response to our stories. It's in numbers now, so just seeing those numbers go up can be a rush of dopamine. After all, social approval is a type of positive reinforcement. That's sort of how socializing in general works. We orient our behavior around the social signals given by other people. If you say a joke in a social environment and everyone laughs, you might start telling more jokes. But if no one laughs, you might stop going to funerals. Likewise, if you wear a new outfit and everyone subtly communicates that it looks nice, you'll wear that outfit more. If everyone communicates that it sucks, you'll wear it less. The language we use, the clothes we wear, the mannerisms we flaunt, the stories we tell, a lot of the ways in which we socialize are ultimately a push and pull of social approval and disapproval acting as reinforcers and punishers. All of that is to say that when someone likes your post, it makes you feel good, which makes you want to post more, so that you can get more likes and feel even better about yourself. And if you feel especially bad about yourself, say because everyone else's photos look better than yours, then that can also push you to post more, to get more likes and to use that to prop up your crippled self-esteem. This is ultimately just positive reinforcement. Likes are a positive reinforcer that strengthen the behavior of posting. This cycle is at least part of why social media platforms have a never-ending stream of content. They are engineered to reward you psychologically for producing content. Throw in the fact that adolescents tend to be more susceptible to social reinforcers than adults, and it's no wonder teenagers are glued to their screens. Their screens are covered in glue. Plus, making content on social media to receive social approval in the form of likes, comments, and fire emojis is arguably a variable ratio schedule, just like gambling. I don't know how many podcast episodes I have to make before one of them blows up and I become famous and influential. So if that's something I want, my only option is to keep churning out content until something sticks. Alternatively, if I am rich and famous and I make money off of my online content, well, that's just another positive reinforcer to keep me posting. So, here we are. The pieces are in place. We have an audience regularly checking in with the app thanks to the way we've designed notifications, and we have an endless stream of content to keep them occupied, maintained by a cycle of social approval and increasingly fragile egos. The job of the social media platform, then, is to connect these two elements together. And if you've been paying attention, you can probably guess how that's done. Most social media platforms have a content page of sorts, where you can view a particular piece of user-made content and readily access other works at will. Think about how YouTube displays a list of recommended videos on the side while you watch something, or how platforms like Instagram have a never-ending stream of content to swipe through. You never just watch one thing. There's always something next in the queue. And that's the important part. This is where the magic happens, where audience meets bottomless pit of content. We have a rat, and we have food. All we need to do is to teach it to press the lever. One way these platforms do this is by making it as easy as possible to cycle through content. Notice that most social media platforms infinitely cycle through content automatically, like how YouTube has an autoplay feature that immediately starts another video it thinks you might like as soon as you finish the one you were watching. Not to mention, even when it does take actual human engagement to maintain the stream of content, it's usually extremely streamlined to make it as easy as possible, requiring nothing more than a click or a swipe. Using an operant conditioning framework, this is ultimately the target behavior: swiping. The more you swipe, the more things you look at, the more time you spend on social media, the more data these platforms collect, the more money they make. The behavior of swiping is reinforced through the presentation of content, like memes or Family Guy clips or whatever it is you personally look at on social media, which are positive reinforcers. As much as I've been complaining about social media, let's be careful to understand that a lot of content on social media is enjoyable to watch. It might be funny or informative or endearing or sexy or thought-provoking, but if social media content wasn't engaging on some basic level, we wouldn't be as addicted to our phones as we are. And this content is curated by engagement algorithms that track what you spend most of your time looking at in order to determine what you personally find the most engaging. So, swiping is an operant behavior reinforced with the presentation of content, which is curated by algorithms to be things you specifically find engaging. But not everything you see on social media is a hit, right? Some memes aren't funny, some selfies are just cringe, and sometimes you swipe and it's just an ad. Swiping through social media is only reinforced on some swipes, and you can't predict which swipes will be reinforced and which won't. In other words, it's a variable ratio schedule. That's right, baby. TikTok is a slot machine in your pockets. Other than the actual slot machines in your pocket, I suppose. Aren't phones wonderful? Variable ratio schedules are, as we've said, one of the highest responding operant schedules, and they're also really hard to extinguish because they train you to persevere through dry spells. If you're not reinforced on every swipe, that means you learn to keep swiping even when you're not actually entertained by what's on your phone, which could potentially help explain why we often end up wasting our time looking at things we're not interested in anyway. But it doesn't stop there. Have you noticed the trend as of late towards short-form content? Instagram, YouTube, and even Spotify have all adopted these sorts of models based on the success of TikTok. There are fears that this may be having detrimental effects on children's attention spans, and that's understandable, but why are these platforms doing this anyway? Well, do you remember the matching law? We tend to orient our behavior towards things that reinforce us more often. Short-form content means you never spend too long on one clip before you roll the dice and you're on to the next. That means you are being repeatedly reinforced over and over. It's a lot of tiny reinforcers added up, which may be part of why social media is more addictive than, say, books or movies. Watching a movie may ultimately be a more fulfilling experience, but it takes time to get that reward. It's one big reinforcer compared to lots and lots of tiny ones. If the movie sucks, you've wasted hours of your life. But if a meme isn't funny, you can just swipe to the next one, which makes it a lot easier to sit there idling away the hours. Not to mention, short-form content means the reward, the reinforcer, be that the punchline, the song, the whatever, comes immediately. Reading books is great, but it's usually a big time investment and you don't get the payoff until you've invested that time and reached the climax. But short-form content rewards you almost immediately. It's the same concept as a pigeon in a cage choosing between two rewards, or a student choosing between studying or playing video games. Social media is designed to be so immediately reinforcing that you'll almost always choose it over the alternative. And then once you've chosen it, you'll get sucked into a never-ending stream of content, of reinforcement. These algorithms are intentionally designed to exploit the blind spots in our brain circuitry, to keep us swiping, craving the next hit of dopamine, even when we know, deep down, that it's not going to come. And I think we all know this, really. How often have you found yourself endlessly refreshing the YouTube homepage in hopes that something interesting will come up? Or been flicking through Instagram at such a pace that you realize you're not actually paying any attention to anything that comes up. You're just going through the motions. We have been trained to crave short-term, immediate, continuous gratification. We have become rats, pressing the lever, over and over, till we're well past full. So, what should we do about it? Well, you could start by sending me money so that I can hire an assassin to take out Elon Musk. But in the meantime, I don't know, why would I know? You're asking me to dismantle what has taken Silicon Valley years to achieve? If you are genuinely looking to reduce your screen time, recognize first of all that I am a pretend psychologist who likes the sound of his own voice. I'm not actually in a position to give advice. But based on how we've seen social media work, and based on my own experience, there are a few things we can do to disrupt this zombification process. You could start by turning off notifications wherever possible to avoid getting sucked into the app when you really don't want to. You could also try making social media intentionally inconvenient to use, like using web versions of the app, which disrupts reinforcement mechanisms because it means you have to put more effort in to get something out. And consider planning your days in advance, when it's easier to exercise self-control and choose the less immediately gratifying option. I think we lose a lot of value through our modern consumerist approach to streamlining things, to making things easy and convenient and efficient, not necessarily better. It's a lot easier to text a friend than to catch up with them when I want to talk, but there's something rewarding about going out and meeting them and negotiating all the awkwardness that comes with that. Our brains are wired to pursue dopamine, not happiness. A junkie can experience pleasure, but that doesn't make them happy. We live in a world that prioritizes easy consumption. But I think we often derive the most joy from the things that take time and effort. That's why I'm here right now, after all. I could be flicking through Arabic memes or playing video games or watching YouTube, and that would probably give me a bigger dopamine hit. But instead I'm here, embarrassing myself with a microphone, because there's something that feels deeply meaningful about creation, about bearing my soul, about thinking about the world and people on a deeper level and trying to really understand who I am and who we are and how we all fit together in this wonderful world of ours. If you can, and I know I sound like a grandpa saying this, set aside some time during the day to be away from screens and to focus on doing things that are not necessarily pleasurable but are meaningful. Spend time with friends, create art, read a book, analyze a song, think about the world, or hell, pick the lint out of your belly button. Lord knows it's not going to pick itself. Call it an exercise in self-control. Thank you dearly for listening. Assuming you are listening and I'm not just speaking to the void, but even that's not too bad because at the very least, the void can't cyberbully me. I hope you learned something today, and if you disagree with my takes or think I'm being overly melodramatic for the sake of making a podcast, by all means, do your own research and make your own podcast about why I'm wrong. Just be nice about it. At the same time, I think there's a lot more that could be said about the role of operant conditioning in, say, substance abuse and gambling. And I also think it could be particularly interesting to look at as a role in video game addiction. Not to mention, the concept of social conditioning goes way deeper than we've talked about today. So if you're in need of an existential crisis, perhaps that's a good place to start. This show is written, performed, and produced by me. Music by Matt Ponio. In a world full of easy consumption, thank you, sincerely, for spending your time with me.